Yes, guys, how you doing? Welcome back to the Spurs Talk Show. I am Sean Butler. I hope you're all happy and healthy, doing the things you love with those that you love doing them with. It's Wednesday night. You probably see this Thursday morning first thing. It's massive news from Tottenham today when they finally released their financial figures for the 22-23 season. Just about squeezed it in on the deadline. Maybe you could even accuse them of being slightly late with it. But anyway, there's 50 pages worth of accounts to read through. And you know that's the sort of thing I will be doing and bringing to you any nuggets of gold that are in there, any insightful and interesting takes that I can decipher. But you know what? I've been very sick the last couple of days, and I'm still not quite up to doing that in its entirety. And so what I'm going to do instead is focus tonight on the big news that's come from it. And that is that Daniel Levy has explicitly stated and expressly demonstrated his intent to seek capital injections from third parties. Now, we are going to be looking at the noise, the summary takes on that, the reasons why, the fact that the profitability of the club or the revenue streams of the club has never been as successful as they were last year. However, rising costs because of the cost of living crisis, because of the fuel surges, because of the war in Ukraine, because of all of the things that are creating and causing you to have less money in your pocket, are also affecting the ability for the club to generate better margins, may have reached a point where Tottenham Hotspur are saying, in order to go again, in order to get from where we are to where we want to be, to compete and to go after the very best players, we need new money. Daniel Levy and ENIC clearly are not prepared to put any more money of their own in. They put in 150, or they said they were going to put 150 million quid in a couple of years ago. And the method of that was through dilution of the minority shareholders. There was a specific valuation that the 100 million of the 150 that was taken was priced at, and everybody was on board with it. And the minority shareholders were diluted a little bit, but the 100 million came into the coffers. It could have been 150, but they stopped at 100. They could be doing more if they wanted to, but they clearly don't. And they are now seeking new third-party investments. And what that looks like could be and will be the most fascinating story to go through over the next coming days, weeks, and months until that whole thing pans out. So listen, I'm not going to be going through the details of the accounts in specifics today, but I am going to be looking at them in some various articles that I'm going to be bringing up, or this specific article in a second, just so that you get an idea of why it is that the costs and the profitability and the revenue streams of Tottenham Hotspur are where they are, and why. Because last season we were in the Champions League, and that money raised was largely responsible for the increase in revenue, but the increases in costs had nothing to do necessarily with Champions League. It was the overall cost of putting on events in general. And so if the costs remain high, as they will do this season, but this season without the Champions League revenue, then next season's accounts are going to look very different. And if Daniel Levy's risk appetite has changed, if he's no longer wishing to take more ownership of Tottenham Hotspur, maybe he is doing exactly what I said a year and a half ago about the Glazers. Maybe they are seeing the writing on the wall, and that the kind of tip of the iceberg has already been found, where the juice is no longer necessarily worth the squeeze for these sorts of investors anymore. And so we might be opening the door to new investment. And what that looks like, well, it will depend entirely on the structure of the deal. It could look like a cash injection that stays within the club and further dilutes all shareholders, including ENIC. It could look like a specific sell-off from some of ENIC's potential holdings to the new investor. So you have a new third party. Again, similar to what happens with the Glazers, 25% Sir Jim Ratcliffe has bought. And with that, the Glazers, we don't yet know how much of that money will be taken out of the club by the Glazers, but some of it will be left in and will be put to work in rebuilding the infrastructure, rebuilding the stadium. Tottenham don't have any of those problems. And so if ENIC were to look to sell a slice of the pie, and again, it can only be up to 25%. And again, the specific people who can buy it, there'll be conflicts of interests. It's multi-club ownership conversations. It's all very, very exciting, guys. Let's go through it in as much detail as I have access to right now. Don't hold me to all of this stuff, because this will be a very, very fast moving story. And surely there will be lots and lots of different takes along the way. But I'm going to start with this sportsbusiness.com. It's a website I go to all the time. They're brilliant journalists, and they keep it quite factual and talk about the numbers rather than the conjecture. This is from their article today. Premier League club Tottenham Hotspur is in talks with prospective investors after reporting losses of £86.8 million for the 22-23 financial year, despite total revenue rising to a record high of 550. Chairman Daniel Levy revealed the push for investment today, saying the North London club needed to capitalise on our long-term potential. He added, to continue to invest in the teams and undertake future capital projects, the club requires a significant increase in its equity base. The board and its advisors, Rothschild & Co., are in discussions with prospective investors. Any recommended investment proposal would require the support of the club's shareholders. A year ago, Jam Najafi, an Iranian-American billionaire who serves as the chair of investment company MSP Sports Capital, who, of course, are a multi-club ownership group with links to interest in lots of different things like Formula One. I think in terms of football, they have ties to 4 clubs: FC Augsburg, the team where Japhet Tanganga went on loan, I believe, and didn't play a minute and came back to play for Millwall. AD Alcaron, GD Estoril, and SK Beveren. Outside of football, they are, of course, investors in the McLaren F1 team. Now, we heard about that story a while ago. I'm going to press pause on the other stories because I've got 3 or 4 different names that we can talk about regarding potential investors that might be interested. But let's finish off with the kind of the rationale as to why it might happen first. Levy's comments came as Tottenham announced a 24% hike in revenue year on year, driven by increased broadcast revenue and prize money from participating in the Champions League, as well as record matchday income and a large rise in commercial revenue. However, operating expenses rose 21% to 500 million nearly due to increased first-team costs, the hosting of multiple non-football events, and cost rises outside of our control, such as utilities, rates, consumables, and increases in the London living wage. Now, I'm sure in the 50 pages of reports, if I had the time and the inclination, and I will do at some point, I'll be able to break down how much of that 21% rise came from what the first team costs versus how much of it came from the cost of living crisis that's happening. But I can guarantee you that the cost of living crisis is Tottenham Hotspur and no other football club are immune from that. And that's always why I, to a degree, defend what some people think is defending the indefensible, when people think that as a fan of a football club, that they shouldn't have to wear the additional costs. Every business will pass on the costs of their cost rises onto the cost of their products. But people think that that shouldn't happen at football clubs when, the reality is that when you look at CPI and RPI, the inflation metrics, and you hear it on the news, you listen to BBC and you hear inflation last year was 12% or 10% or 8%, and the target is 2%. They're taking just a few different products. The price of bread, the price of a gallon of milk, the price of a litre of petrol, whatever, and they are measuring the price rises year over year. What they are not doing is looking at the specific costs of any individual business. And so whilst the average might be 8% or 10%, in the case of putting on a footballing event, the cost of infrastructure repairs, the cost of plumbing, the cost of all of the different ingredients for bread and beer and the burgers and all that stuff, the cost of staff is a lot higher than 10%. I promise you that. And so, for me, that's why as a business guy, I've always said I understand why Tottenham Hotspur need to pass the costs on. And I know that it's an unpopular take, but 6% or 7.5% gross season ticket rise over the last 5 years, I don't think is that unreasonable at all. But to the point where all of the additional revenue that Tottenham had from doing well in the Champions League, 24%, has essentially been nullified to all but a tiny degree by the increasing costs, then, having higher revenue bases doesn't really make that much difference if the costs going up in line with it. The after-tax loss of 88.6 million was the 4th successive year that Tottenham have posted losses, following on from the 2022 deficit of 50.1. Of course, this is after tax. Really what you should be looking at is the EBITDA, the earnings before interest, tax and depreciation, where Tottenham have done very healthily and actually made a large profit. After tax and depreciation includes the write-downs of the stadium and lots of other, and interest on the state, on the payment loans and all those sorts of things, which do skew the number. But again, I don't want to bore you with that stuff for the purposes of this video because we're talking about new investment. That's the exciting bit. Despite the large losses for the club is not at risk of breaching the Premier League's profitability and sustainability rules because stadium costs and annual depreciation, as I just said, charge of 72 million are not included as part of PSR. The August 2022 sale of Harry Kane, 2024 sale of Harry Kane will be factored into next year's accounts. Tottenham's match day income reached a record of 117.6 million, up from 106. This was described as a critical revenue stream for the security of the stadium debt. Net debt remains high at 677 million, but the club also pointed out that 90% of our financial borrowings are at fixed rates with an average interest rate of 2.79%. Now, listen, you may hate Daniel Levy. You may absolutely despise the way that we run our football club. But if sustainability and making sure that this club is around tomorrow by decisions you make today is the key component of what a chairman and what accountants are there to do, then to secure the interest rates at 2.79% on long-term fixed rates was an absolute mark of a genius in that particular moment. Because if you were trying to secure financing right now, which is what someone like Todd Boehly would be doing when Chelsea looked to try to rebuild their stadium, and they've in fact had to shelve all those plans. And if you look at Everton, for example, who again, absolute nightmare set of results for them that came out today. That club, I don't know how they're going to be continued to go, even with the help of their 7-7 partner multi-club ownership investment. Broadcast revenue increased 148 million a year earlier, while the club benefited from a rise in UEFA prize money to 56, up from 10 million. So 45 million pound extra from the Conference League to the Champions League. However, no European football will hurt this year's financials, and it will, especially if the cost of putting on the products are on. If the costs remain high but the revenue drops down again, then next year's figures will look skewed if it wasn't for the fact that we sold Harry Kane. Tottenham enjoyed a large rise in commercial income as sponsorship, merchandising, and other revenues such as third-party events at its stadium, although the figure of 227 million, up from 183, was not broken down by category. That's the problem with the results. They only break it down into 4 categories, and so you never really know how much of the money from the commercial comes from what. Does it come from the billboard advertising? Does it come from the Skywalk? Does it come from the Formula One? Does it come from Beyonce? You don't know the details. You just have to lump it into one and see that everything looks good. They're doing everything they can to get every ounce of juice from the squeeze that they possibly can. Now, I won't go through everything else, but it says here we expect commercial revenues to rise from third-party events, although this will not compensate for the lack of European football this season. We have operated on a financially sustainable basis and can now optimize the true value of key assets, the unrivaled facilities at our multi-use stadium and our training campus. Tottenham's wage bill rose sharply by 20% to 251 million, while Levy also enjoyed a pay increase from 3.2 to 3.5 million and took home a £3 million bonus. Now, I know this last little piece here is something that really irks a lot of people. What I would say, guys, look, it is what it is. I can understand if you want to think of it like it's a slap in the teeth. But at the end of the day, what I can tell you is that CEOs who work for companies that are listed on the stock market of similar size to Tottenham Hotspur take home far higher total compensations than 3 million or even 6 million with their bonus. So if he wasn't at Tottenham, he could be somewhere else earning more money. Anyway, let's just get back to this part here. The story I wanted to talk to you about. We're looking at to capitalize on our long-term potential, to continue to invest in the teams and undertake future capital projects. The club requires a significant increase in its equity base. Well, what does that look like? Who could that be? Well, first and foremost, we have to go right back to 15th of February 2023 to if we're looking at American directions. Billionaire Najafi preparing a 3.75 billion. This is also from Sport Business, by the way. Bid for Tottenham Hotspur. Jam Najafi, an Iranian-American billionaire who serves as the chair of investment capital MSP Sports Capital, is reportedly preparing a 3.75 billion bid for Premier League club. The bid would propose that MSP and its partners provided funds for the 70% of the purchase price, with backers from the Gulf region to supply the remaining 30%, according to the Financial Times, which cited 2 people with direct knowledge of the plans. Now, this was an attempt to buy the entire club, and they valued it at the time at £3.5 billion, $3.75 billion, something like that. The report added that the proposal is weeks away from being formally presented to Tottenham owner Joe Lewis and chairman Daniel Levy. The offer would value the North London club's equity at around $3 billion, with an additional $750 million of debt. So, to me, you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. You're moving from one owner to another. Now, obviously, I don't believe Daniel Levy has any intentions of moving. They've just started the new hotel group, maybe the new hotel chain. Maybe they are looking for activity and equity investment to support with that. I'm not entirely sure. I haven't been able to find out where the funding for the hotel is coming from, although it has been sidelined for a long time, but it hasn't come from Tottenham Hotspur. So anyone that's fearful of Tottenham Hotspur having our coffers raided to pay for hotel rooms, that's not the case. But one point I have always maintained and made out to you guys is that those people that don't like Daniel Levy, if their anger is at the fact that the club haven't put their hands in their pockets enough to back Tottenham Hotspur. Now, the rules have changed around doing that. You can't just inject money into the football club, similar to like what Newcastle's new owners are doing. Newcastle's new owners are the wealthiest. PIF fund is the wealthiest fund in the world. It's got more money under the ground than there is in all money in existence. And yet Newcastle United are limited by the revenue that their club generates. And so for the next 2 or 3, 4 years, until Newcastle are going to regentrify and regenerate all of the areas, the training ground and the stadium, all of that stuff, which can come from Saudi Arabia, but will not count against the PSR rules because it's infrastructure spend. That same opportunity doesn't exist for Tottenham Hotspur. Where Daniel Levy and ENIC could have shown more ambition is to, rather than putting their money into the hotel, they could have at parts in the past put more money into the football club, invested more money in that regard. But instead, they don't seem to be willing to do that anymore. They don't seem to be willing to take more of that 150 million like they did a couple of years ago and buy more shares, dilute the current ownership and put that into the football club. Their interests are more in property. We know that. And so if they are looking for someone else, then maybe Jam Najafi and his Iranian-American sports group, MSP Sports Capital, might be the guys to do it. At least on some level, they have a knowledge of football. They certainly have access to multi-club ownership. If you are interested in multi-club ownership, you know I am. Then obviously these teams that they have, Augsburg out in Austria, I'm not sure where Alarcon is. I think it might be Spain. I'm not sure where Estoril is. And SK Beveren sounds like it's Swedish, but I'm not sure. But listen, if Tottenham were to go down the path of MSP Sports being the introduction in, then of course you have Scott Munn, who has all of the wealth of experience at the City Football Group, to come in and to know how to maximize and utilize the revenues and the massive efficiencies. If you do it right, if you get it wrong, it's a mess. But if you do it right, the benefits and the efficiencies and the economies of scale that you can harvest and harness from having 4 or 5 different teams where there's shared learnings, shared opportunities, coaching wins, if you like, can get pushed across. You can have back office costs centralized in a different area for tax purposes. There's a never-ending plethora of benefits to multi-club ownership models when done right. And it usually takes to have at least 3 teams or more that are successful in their own right to be part of the same model in order for everyone to see the benefit. Now, if Tottenham were to be plugged in to MSP Sports Capital's multi-club ownership, but via some injection of capital, then that would be very interesting to me. It would be very, very interesting. Of course, Jam Najafi, Iranian American. I'm not sure if Iranians, without trying to get into politics, I don't know how useful that would be. But of course, he comes from the bit American side, and Tottenham, of course, have got the NFL. So don't forget. Now, there would certainly be one hell of a lot of billionaire business groups over in America that would love to get their mitts on Tottenham Hotspur with the multi-sports complex arena for the NFL, for concerts and everything else. But that is not the only group that might be interested, guys. So I'm going to pivot across now. So let's move away from Jam Najafi and look at potential other suitors. And of course, it's pretty easy to go to Qatar, guys. If you remember, first and foremost, the 25% ownership stake that Sir Jim Ratcliffe finally got from Manchester United. Well, it wasn't a 1-horse race. He was in a 2-horse race with Sheikh Jassim of Qatar. And he hasn't necessarily just gone away quietly into the night. The fact that he didn't quite get his hands on Manchester United will maybe mean that he is interested in Tottenham Hotspur. It's a plug and play for him. He wants to get involved in football. Like I say, he doesn't need to worry about the infrastructure at Tottenham like he does at Manchester United. And maybe he and Daniel Levy could find a way for him to be able to insert some cash and capital into the club while still remaining within the PSR rules, but obviously ultimately to help Tottenham Hotspur plug those final holes in their transfer strategy. If not Sheikh Jassim from Qatar, then of course don't also forget that it wasn't that long ago that you had the Qatari Sports Investment Group, QSI, who wholly own Paris Saint-Germain. And this is what Football London are talking about right now. I don't know why my screen is jumping up and down, but it says, in the past, Spurs has been the subject of intense speculation with regards to a meeting between Levy and the president of Paris Saint-Germain, Nasser El Khalifi. Khalifi is the chairman of PSG's owners, Qatari Sports Investments, which has made waves at the Parc des Princes with its Galactico transfer policy and bringing in Lionel Messi, Neymar and Kylian Mbappe in recent years. Following Sir Jim Ratcliffe's 25% takeover at United, Qatari banker Sheikh Jassim remains available with a sizable cash sum available, stirring the potential takeover pot. So you got two different areas from Qatar. They're supposed to be entirely separate. One of them in Sheikh Jassim could, if he wanted to, do a fully 100% takeover of Tottenham Hotspur. But once again, the benefits of a fully owned takeover when you don't have any infrastructure spend is almost like having all the money in the world and not the ability to spend it, as is being seen with the PSI in Newcastle. So be careful what you wish for. It's not as simple and as deliciously anticipatory as you might think and you might want, especially if Daniel Levy will still be there. There might be a power struggle, who is in control of what. So Jim Ratcliffe going into Manchester United has already said, he demands that he has control of footballing operations. He brought in Dave Brailsford, who's going to tear up the entire script. People don't know whether they've got their jobs or not, whether they're coming or going. There's a lot of disruption that can happen when one of these sorts of things happens. And whether it's to the ultimate detriment or to the positive for the football club, only time will tell. But there's more other names that could still be there. Liberty Media Group. Now, that was a name that was mentioned a year and a half ago. Formula One owners Liberty Media had been suggested as a potential takeover for Tottenham last summer, although those reports did go away. And earlier this week, the US media conglomerate bought MotoGP in a deal valued at $3.6 billion. The deal is expected to be officially completed at the end of the year. Sheikh Jassim will not look to buy another football club amid links to a move to take over Tottenham, claims reporter Ben Jacobs. The Qatari-based 9-2 Foundation has been rumoured with potentially making a bid for Spurs following their failed move from Manchester United. However, that now seems unlikely. We shall see. There is, of course, another option, guys, and we're not going to talk about the JD preparing a bid for Tottenham Hotspur. That was according to the Express way back when. We're not going to talk about that. What we are going to talk about instead is maybe one that fell under the radar here by Football London guys, was when one of the United Arab Emiratis, a place that's just north of Dubai, I believe, the sheikh from that particular region was also seen at Tottenham Hotspur. Dan Plumley here has insisted that Tottenham are probably up for sale. This is from Tuesday the 5th of March, remember. Probably up for sale after Daniel Levy was spotted with Sheikh Abdullah bin Rashid Al Mualla recently. The football finance expert admitted that it would spark takeover talk as the deputy ruler of Al Quwain was in hand with the Spurs owner. Plumley shared that Spurs are an attractive proposition for any investor, with a big takeover being close in the past under Levy, who moved away from those. They absolutely are. So it will be no surprise to see media stories linked to that when people are spotted with relative people like that. We know that Spurs are probably up for sale. There's nothing earth-shattering in terms of news for sure, but they are a club that has always been on the fringes of maybe there is a big takeover coming. A couple of times, perhaps, Daniel Levy has moved away from deals that we thought were going to get over the line. We know the potential for Spurs linked to the new stadium from a financial perspective. We know they have always been good at managing their finances. They are an attractive club in London, and there are loads of things where you could look at as an investment proposition, and it's no surprise that people will naturally spark rumours and stories around this. I think every club is up for sale at the right price, but So it's no surprise to people looking at when you see these influential figures together, it's going to spark rumours. Levy has transformed Spurs into a revenue-earning machine with a new stadium, which was also built at the perfect time for cost of everyone involved. Listen, we'll stop there, guys. At the end of the day, there's been about 7 or 8 different names of conglomerates, businessmen in America, companies, sheikhs, and Middle Eastern trillionaires that are interested potentially in Tottenham Hotspur. All of them might happen. This is the closest we've ever heard to Tottenham Hotspur officially being put up for sale, or at least officially looking for some sort of investment. What I would say, though, as I always do in these things, it's always super exciting. And depending on your stance on Daniel Levy, you may want this day to come sooner rather than later. But be careful what you wish for. You just might get it. Look at what's happened to Chelsea. They are an absolute mess. A man with a lot of money not knowing what to do and how to run a football club is a lot more dangerous than a man who knows what he's doing, but with a lesser propensity to spend money that he has. Tottenham are doing okay. We do need more. We need to kick on more. And I don't think we're ever going to sign a £100 million player with Daniel Levy at the helm. That much I can agree with you on. But having new owners coming into the football club does not change the rules of PSR and FFP. You get slightly more wiggle room with new owners coming in. You get an extra additional amount of spend for the first 3 years, which gives you some time to adjust and to put the right foot forward. But, are Tottenham in a really good position right now? And how much disruption do you want to that scenario to play out? Do you want someone coming in, tearing up everything, sacking Paratici, sacking Scott Munn, bringing in their own people? Do you want there to be a power struggle between Daniel Levy and whoever the person might be, the equivalent of a Sir Jim Ratcliffe, who says, I'll give you 25% of the money so that Enid can take a large slice of that out and sail off a little bit into the sunset with their profits, but Daniel Levy remaining in charge, and one of them wants to have ultimate control at the boardroom. Those sorts of things can be disruptive. Those sorts of things are never easy when egos can collide, and it's not necessarily going to be a wonderful thing. However, that's the bad news. The good news, the good side of the coin, might be that you have someone come in who has a slight better risk tolerance, a risk appetite for when that opportunity is there, when that player that we desperately need is going to cost you 70 million and Daniel Levy's only willing to pay 60 and so walks away. Maybe the new guy might be willing to pay 70 or 80 or whatever it is, and you get the guy that you need, and then maybe great things can happen. I don't know. It's a nascent story. It's new. It's not new, but it's coming back now because Daniel Levy has confirmed that he is looking for capital injections. We've got a lot to chew over about this for the next week or two, and there'll be lots more to talk about as we go through the numbers in more detail as well. But an interesting story, guys. Let me know your thoughts. Like, subscribe, and comment. And as always, apologies for the long one. Bye-bye.